What's up, future shredlords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. You knew it was coming. Alternate picking exercises. Nails it. Listen, these are more like guidelines, hopefully showing you how to come up with exercises that are going to accelerate your own learning process, because everybody plays alternate picking and their lines and all the rest of that stuff differently. And of course, there's been many comments on social media about making the lessons easier or more accessible and stuff like that. And I get it, because people are like, you get more subscribers and your channel will be more popular or whatever. And that's just it. First off, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm a musician. And realistically speaking, the whole point of Death to the Fingers is just me leaving a testament to the best of my knowledge, you know, some sort of information tool for future musicians to learn the craft and really develop their minds and skills in tandem so that you can become the best musician and the best guitar player that you can. But these music rules, of course, apply to music universally, but of course, our specific focus is the guitar. So no, I'm not going to dumb it down. This is how we basically weed out the weak. You know, there's a million channels on the YouTubes for people that, you know, are interested in sort of like much more laid back content. And I absolutely get that. But I promise you, the lessons are just going to get harder. Why? Because the simple fact is that when I was starting to do research about the learning process, because I was like, you know, I'm not getting better at music or the guitar because I don't know how to learn. That's a skill. And so I started looking at a bunch of systems, and I came across this one, the Feynman system, which is, of course, Richard Feynman, I believe. He's a mathematician guy, whatever. Very smart dude, but he's like, if you really want to learn something, one of his quotes, his famous quotes is, if you really want to learn something, teach it. And there's this process that goes on. So I was like, you know, why not? I already pretty good at this stuff. So start making the lessons. And it's true. It just accelerates because there's now this pressure being applied externally, but in a way that's enjoyable. I love making the videos and I love all you guys, but it just forced me to get to be better as a musician, to be a better guitar player, to keep rising up to the challenge, to come up with new lessons 3 days a week or whatever it is. You know, like there's huge value in that, because you just get into a routine and you just keep learning and learning and learning, and your skill set just keeps elevating and elevating and elevating. Now, I would have never have gotten there if I had doubt. And 99% of the stuff that I do is self-taught. Like, yeah, of course, you can relate it back to the great guitar players. Almost everybody can. But the point being is I sort of figured it out for myself. So for me to sit here and hold your hand and basically, you know, caress your face and be like, oh, it's okay here, let me show you every step of the way, that's me robbing you of the opportunity to discover who you are as a musician and basically capitalize on your own greatness. Sometimes the mind needs time to discover things for itself. From the X-Men, of course. And that's true. Sometimes you have to mull over a concept for years or decades before it actually makes sense. So I just wanted to make that clear at the beginning of the video. Now, it's out of the way. Let's get into these alternate picking exercises. All right, I don't want to whinge on for like 20 minutes here on each one of these exercises. I just want to get in and get out. So number one is obviously you have to work on the skill of alternate picking. It's about physicality. It's about the connection between the mind and using a feedback loop like the pick moving past the string to create a connection there so that you can actually start to vary how much force you use physically to smooth out this alternate picking technique so it gets, more even and sort of more accurate. Then you've got hammer-ons and pull-offs. You have hand-eye coordination. You have dexterity involved. These things all have to be concentrated on at the same time. These exercises are worthless without you being like, I should get my fingers up, play on the tips. How are my hammer-ons and pull-offs doing? How is, the rhythm of my fingers moving and whatnot? Is the gait even? Or am I, sort of like off kilter? That stuff is important. Who's going to tell you that? What, you think I'm going to show up to your place and be like, oh yeah, I don't know. You got to be the person when you're sitting there practicing being like, that part there, it's a little off. And you'll hear me talk about it in the later sections where I absolutely lose it. And that's an important part of it because you're building up stamina. You're building up, obviously, the hard drive space, because it's actually very difficult to concentrate on doing fast alternate picking for long extended runs and keep the alternate picking going smoothly. But of course, it starts off here. So I'm doing it at a medium tempo. I'm using the major modes. In this case, I'm using the classical method. I'm using 3 notes per string. Okay, I'm using a hybridized version of the classical method. And I'm just ascending using G major. So it doesn't really matter what scale system you're using. In this case, it's because it's the diatonic scale. So I'm using that as the system. And then, of course, I'm just working on alternate picking, moving across the strings, controlling the string noise, obviously, so that it's not just a mess where you hear a bunch of noise, but you can actually hear the notes being alternate picked. You know how it is. And later on, you can start to apply muting, like you see me do, where you can sort of mute the lower strings a little bit more and sort of bring out that flavor with respect to the alternate picking. But of course, just starting off nice and easy, memorizing the fretboard, using the basic diatonic scale system to know where you are, what system you're playing in. Is it Ionian? Is it Dorian? Is it Phrygian? Is it Aeolian? What are you doing? 3 notes per string? Are you doing the classical method? Constantly reinforcing this information every time you practice, especially when you're doing it in the moment, will have enormous benefits 5 or 6 years down the road. Do it now. Next. All right, part 2 here. Wow, shocker. It's essentially part 1, but with the minor pentatonic scale played in reverse. No big deal. I think it's A minor pentatonic. Essentially, the thing here is that the lesson is that you need to be good at alternate picking with the classical method, where there's 2 notes on certain strings and 3 notes on other strings, 3 notes per string, where there's 3 notes on every string, and of course the minor pentatonic system, where there's just 2 notes on every string. So there's this, sort of spread combinations, if you will. And that can mess with you when you basically start jumping back and forth between the systems, which is why it's important to do something like this and just to add in a certain level of, complexity to the lick. We played it backwards, if you will, and it just sort of, again, messes with you and forces you to shake it up a little bit so that you're not always playing these scales exactly the same way every single time, because that'll just put you to sleep and you get nothing from it. So again, the big takeaway is not just doing the minor pentatonic scale, it's just to get comfortable with the idea that in certain systems you have 2 notes on certain strings. In other systems you have 3 notes. And in other systems still you have a combination of both. Nails it. Next. All right, two-string groupings, obviously, a la Vinnie Moore and Greg Howe and all this good stuff. Basically ascending a diatonic scale again. Now, listen, there's several components to this idea. Number one, just the sort of little mini loop for each position, right? So I start off in whatever, Dorian or Ionian, and then move up to the next position, and then the next position, and then the next position. And to be able to do that, I'm starting to factor in a slide. But the first part is just working in each of the positions so that you can play the sequence on the high E string and the sequence on the B string, and then play them both together relatively smoothly. Then you're going to factor in the slide so that you can move from the previous position to a new one, either up or down. And of course, then at the very end, you're going to move where you have the slide located, whether it's going to be on the B string or in the end, of course, I do it on the high E string. So that's really the idea there is you're seeing me do a big sort of compound exercise at the very end. But of course, working up to something like that, if you've never really done it before, you have to start off with the idea of just like concentrating on one position, then concentrating on one position and then the next position, and then adding in that slide there, of course, to move between one and the next. Of course, you can create even smaller loops where you use the slide on the B string and the high E string just to move between two positions, which is just a much smaller version of what I actually do here. So this is one of those granddaddy exercises you have to know. Later on in the video at the end, I do it at super shred speed with respect to just one string for speed and dexterity exercises. But the point being here is this is like the gateway drug for like the need for shred. So if you're really big into shred, this one here should be the one you should actually practice the most outside of just the, sort of alternate picking on one string, where you can just work on the actual technique of alternate picking before applying it to moving across the strings. But I digress. Let's get into the next exercise. All right, in that exercise there, obviously you can see we've kicked up the speed significantly, but we've reduced the complexity of actually the arrangement of notes. So now in this case, what I'm doing is 2 and 3 finger sort of combinations where I do the slides, where I'm using 2 finger sort of configurations, and then I do the slides with 3 finger configurations. And then of course, just going full bore or as fast as you can, if you will, with respect to the alternate picking on one string. So the slides, the combination obviously of moving between just 2 finger combinations and 3 finger combinations is going to mess with you. And of course, when you apply the slide, where it's going to be a two finger thing, just keep doing the sequence where it's just 2 fingers with the slide, or when you're doing it with 3 fingers, and then of course ascending and descending as necessary. Of course, with the alternate picking stuff, you got to keep it even and controlled. That's why I do it. I think it's on the G string in this case. You notice how I'm controlling all the other string noise. You're really only hearing just the G string going on there. So that's a bit of an art form. Make sure you practice that when you're actually working on these types of alternate picking exercises. But one string, alternate picking way faster, using a diatonic scale, of course, and then just working on using the slides when you're using 2 finger configurations and 3 finger configurations, where either you're sliding with your pinky or sliding with your first finger. Obviously, those things are going to be insanely important because you're going to do them all the time. Next. All right, you knew it was coming, an arpeggio sequence. Essentially, just because you're playing arpeggios doesn't mean you can't use alternate picking. Those things are not mutually exclusive, as I just demonstrate. Obviously, it's a great way to get in some alternate picking, but it's also another way to practice arpeggios so that you really dig into each one of those steps in the sequence and whatnot, and break down that sound step by step in your ear. A very, very important sort of process with respect to getting good at music. Just hearing these sounds and being able to recognize them to a relative degree is like the most important job, of course. So, of course, since the arpeggios are more challenging, I just slow the speed down significantly and go off the rails at the end there, doing a little sequence. You know, notice where I jump up at Lydian there, I do the minor 7 flat 5, setting up the dominant 7 back in the root position. So before ending in the B minor pentatonic, of course, over the D7 backing track. So that's an interesting one. Any 5 chord from a diatonic scale system, you can move to the Phrygian position and play the minor pentatonic sequence and everything related to that, and you are off to the races. So that's pretty useful, just for future reference. So, you know, just because we sort of tend to believe that we're playing arpeggios, it sweeps and all the rest of that stuff, negative. Get in there with the alternate picking. I think you'll find that that's a very useful tool to help you clean up your picking in the first place, but also get a better understanding and appreciation for these arpeggios. Right, let's cap this bad boy off. All right, full shred mode engaged. Essentially, you just see me recycling that previous idea where we slid around on the G string, but the note sequences were much, much slower, the sort of transition between the notes of the scale and whatnot. Now, of course, we're doing groups of 3, and we're using that sliding idea to connect 2 adjacent shapes. So you get this full-on shred cascade on one string. And the most important thing here is you'll notice at the last, I don't know, 5 seconds or so before I go into like this really not so great hammer-on and pull-off run, I start to lose it with respect to the alternate picking. And so what I'm doing here is I start out pretty good. It sounds decent. But then, of course, as things kind of carry on over the span of about a minute, I start to lose it. And I'm gassing out, I guess you could say. So you have to do that on a regular basis because it's very difficult, and there's no real way that you can train your mind to keep it up, right? With respect to the alternate picking stuff, it's weird how it just starts to wander a little bit, and you have to really stay focused. So that right there in and of itself is the most important part about this whole section. It's not about playing fast. You'll get playing it that fast if you play as much and as for as long as I do. But the point being here is that it's the stamina, it's the mental focus that's the real mind killer, because anybody can do that. And even at moderate speeds, you're going to run into the same problem if you haven't already noticed it. So the takeaway here is that once you start gassing out, just, you know, end it a little bit. And then normally I would just go right back to the beginning again and start doing that exercise full bore all over again and keep going until I can do 1.5 minutes. And then it's 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden it's 3.5 minutes or however long you can go. Job's done. Okay, so that right there is the big takeaway with the fast one. Not only is it the transitions, the dexterity, obviously, the stamina, the sort of endurance necessary to keep it up for as long as you possibly can. But of course, the recognition is just keep going until you actually it starts falling apart physically. And then sort of end it collect yourself and then return back to the beginning and start again, so that you kind of, it's like, working out with weights. You sort of hit it, do one set, and then you're going to do another set and another set and another set. And of course, all during that time, you're working on the hammer-ons and pull-offs. You're working on the accuracy. You're working on remembering the sequence of notes. You're calling out the positions. You're like, we're playing in the key of E. This is the Aeolian position I'm starting off in. I'm doing Aeolian and I'm doing Mixolydian. That stuff right there being brought to the bear, at the moment when you're practicing, makes the difference between a killer musician and somebody that's just a hobby guitarist. They're like, that's Mixolydian. The only way you get there is being like, I'm playing Mixolydian. I'm sorry. I wish it was different, but it isn't. There is no way to program yourself. And then eventually Mixolydian stops being a word and it starts being a sequence of sounds. So when you hear that, you're like, oh, there's the Mixolydian mode. And then, you've finally hit the big time. Okay, so work on these sequences. I appreciate every single one of you. Of course I do. Work hard on your studies and don't be discouraged. There were many, many, many times in my youth when I watched guitar players that were obviously light years better than I was, but I never despaired. Instead, I just harbored the secret dream that I would work harder to get up to their level. And, I think I'm doing okay for myself right now, and you can do the exact same thing for yourself too. Don't expect someone to give you something. Instead, go out and tear it from the rock yourself, because you'll have that personal satisfaction, and in a lot of ways, it actually drives the machine that much harder.